Hello world and welcome to the Saw Retrospective. Saw X is coming out this upcoming Friday, September 29th, so I figured it's a good time to go back through the rest of the series. I'm going to be discussing each of the movies thus far with regards to three categories: the story, the twist, and the traps. This is a very hard series to talk about without spoilers, especially with regards to all the twists and turns. So I'm just going to get that out of the way right now. There's going to be lots of spoilers for all the movies. I'm going to try my best not to discuss later films. So, for example, when I'm talking about Saw 1, I'm not going to discuss any of the things that are revealed in, let's say, Saw 3, for example. I just picked that one randomly. Um, I will have timestamps in the description below, so feel free to use those to jump to specific films if you want, or to avoid specific films if you don't want to see discussion about specific ones. So, without further ado, let's dive right into Saw, the 2004 movie, not the 2003 short. Although, just to briefly toss that out there, there was a 2003 short that was made kind of as a proof of concept before the actual full release of the film. It mostly goes over the scene where Amanda is discussing what she went through with the reverse bear trap, although instead of Amanda, it's a slightly different character played by co-writer Lee Winnell, who would then go on to play the role of Adam in the actual full-length movie. Anyway, story. So there's two main storylines that are going on in the first Saw movie. The I guess the first one we meet in a rather lengthy, I think 15 or 16-minute opening sequence, is Adam and Dr. Gordon chained to pipes in a very dirty bathroom. I think that the bathroom is definitely one of the more iconic things in the series, and throughout this part of the storyline, we see it's essentially an escape room with them trying to figure out what's going on and how to get out of it through a series of various clues that have been left for them. There's a lot of flashbacks, potentially too many flashbacks. I mean, it's the series became known for its flashbacks that had a mixture of making things more clear and making things more confusing as the series went on, and you definitely get a big sense of that even as far back as this first movie. There's a lot of stuff that is told through flashing back. The other main storyline is pretty much a police procedural, as Detective Tapp and Detective Singh are trying to track down who they're calling the Jigsaw Killer and find out who he is and put a stop to him. So there's the two main storylines. The police procedural, which apparently I just can't say, is something that I really like and sets this movie apart from the rest of the series. That's an angle that was definitely um, so it's an angle that honestly wouldn't work as well in a lot of the other movies once we know who Jigsaw is. But yeah, this movie in some ways almost feels more like just a straight up thriller rather than a pure horror movie, and just tonally that sets it apart from almost every other movie, with I want to say one exception, but I'll get to that as it comes up. So, in terms of the twist, this was one that I wish I could have seen this movie in its original run, although I, well, in hindsight, I wish I could have seen it in its original run. I would have been a bit too young for it when it was actually in theaters, but I would imagine this is the kind of thing that would have just blown people's minds. Since this was the very first Saw movie, people didn't. Well, I mean, I can't really say people didn't know the series because there wasn't a series at that point, but people would have gone into this movie not knowing there was a twist. Now, the fact that there's a twist is such a staple in the series that you know each time, okay, there's going to be something that pulls the rug out of you at the end. I already know going into Saw X, there is going to be something that happens at the end. They are going to try to trick me. It's just a thing. It's gonna happen. But the first time, it's probably caught people off guard. And as far as the twists go in the series, this is a really good one. Just that moment at the end when John Kramer, who you thought was just a random dead body, when he actually stands up, is just. They did this twist very well. It's executed very well. It puts an interesting perspective on things, especially considering that we're told early on that Jigsaw likes essentially having a he likes being able to see what's going on. So in this case, he's not behind the scenes watching. He's actually right there in the middle of everything going on. Also, bravo to Tobin Bell for just there was an there was an option for the movie to be done with like a dummy just laying there, but he actually decided to no, he was gonna do it. So throughout all the throughout the entire rest of the movie, that is actually Tobin Bell just lying there on the ground of this dirty bathroom in a pool of blood. And I can't imagine what it would be like to do that, just acting out all these scenes, just laying there while everything else is going on around you. But it must have been an interesting experience. As a side note, I've seen online mentioned a couple times this urban legend that the actors who played Adam and Dr. Gordon weren't told ahead of time about this twist. So when John stands up, then that's actually a look of shock on Adam's face. And that is a bit ridiculous if you consider that the actor who is playing Adam is actually one of the people who came up with the original story for the movie Saw. So out of everyone, he definitely would have known what was going on. Anyway, so moving on. So moving on to the traps, I am going to use the names of the traps as listed in the Saw wiki. So let's just go down the list. So up first we have the bathroom trap, which is the main one that serves kind of as an overarching thing for this movie. It's definitely, I think it's safe to say, in terms of an individual trap, it's the one that we spend the most time with, or the one that takes the longest time to get out of in the whole series. There's a couple movies that have a series of traps put together into one big thing, but as just a single individual trap, I don't think there's anything else that comes even close to this time. Most of them are actually very quick. So I want to say it's a really simple one, but it's actually more complicated than it seems just because at its core, the simplicity is just two people chained to pipes, but besides that, there's a lot of moving parts going on, or not necessarily moving, but there's a lot of different pieces. You have a gun, you have poisonous blood, there's cigarettes, there's saws. There's a lot of different components to it, but throughout all that, it's still managed. It's a very straightforward trap. Straightforward isn't necessarily the right word there, but compared to some of the traps in the as the series goes on, it's not super complicated. It's not over the top. Things don't get ridiculous. It still feels very grounded, very down to earth. And I really appreciate that. It definitely gets the series off to a good start. And I think the fact that the movie begins with a 15 or 16 minutes, depending on whether you count the logos or not, sequence that just focuses entirely on the bathroom. It's a nice way to enter the series. So up next is the razor wire maze. So this one we don't really get to see a lot of. It's definitely a good example, and the first Saw film in general really encompasses this well of we don't see a lot. There's actually not a lot of really graphic violence in this movie. The bits and pieces of violence that we do get are quite strong, but there's a lot more that's implied or shown off screen, and this is something that definitely falls by the wayside as the series goes on. But anyway, so the razor wire maze, we have someone who they had a suicide attempt in the past, but it's unknown whether they're actually suicidal or just trying to get attention, which that's not something I'm going to discuss here just because it's a very heavy and tricky topic, and I don't want to go into that in this video. But in order to survive, the person must cut themselves again in order to get out. I think, it's a good example of connecting the trap to I don't know what to call it, to like the crime the person had, or like the sin. Let's call it the sin. It's connecting the trap to the sin of the victim, where both of them involve cutting, and it's a good parallel. It kind of hammers home that idea of that John Kramer he's not just out there to torture people. He's trying to teach lessons. He's trying to give people meaning to their life, trying to make them appreciate the fact that they are alive. And that's something else that falls by the wayside as the series goes on, but there are reasons for that, so that I can't complain too much about that one. But this is one that you don't actually see a lot, but it's a good example of the crazy editing that happens in this movie. The little bits and pieces of the trap that we do see, it's very sped up. The editing is it's not haphazard, but it's done very quickly, just with lots of shots in just rapid succession to make it actually makes it seem more frenzied and more extreme than it actually is, which is actually a really nice technique in filmmaking. You're making people think that they saw something a lot more intense than they actually did. Okay, up next we have the flammable jelly trap. I'm glad they have the name for this. I wasn't sure what to call this one. I think I had written down in my notes just the person with fire and numbers. This isn't one of the better ones. There's very little to actually tie the trap itself to the sins of the victim. The person specifically was accused of essentially faking illness. He would say that he was sick in order to get out of doing something, and then he gets photographed just somewhere else, just walking out and about. And there was the line that be careful with the fire, otherwise all the people that you've burned with your lies may get their revenge. And that's really the closest we get in terms of tying things together. There is a slow-acting poison running through the victim, which is something that John Kramer must really like, because that actually appears in multiple traps. Just in this movie alone, there's quite a bit of slow-acting poison. But in terms of what lesson you're really supposed to get out of writing down numbers from a wall in order to open up a safe, I'm not really sure what they were going for with this one. It's, yeah, definitely one of the weaker ones in my opinion. Although, up next we have the reverse bear trap. This is definitely the most iconic trap in the Saw franchise. If you don't know anything about the Saw movies, you might still know about this trap. It's been used in advertising. It's shown up in multiple movies. This is the iconic trap in the Saw franchise. I think maybe with the exception of the actual bathroom trap itself. This is the one that you probably see the most often. It's another one it's really simple. It is quite literally a reverse bear trap. Instead of having something that will snap shut, it is something that will snap open. And although the demonstration that's given in the video is a little bit over the top because it's used on a dummy, which actually pretty much obliterates or the fake head, or causes it to, yeah, just like disintegrate, which isn't what would actually happen in a human head in this case. It wouldn't be reduced to powder. But anyway, so yeah, this, as I mentioned before, this trap was the subject of the 2003 short film Saw, or as I've seen it listed someplace, Saw 0.5. But anyway, I think thematically this is a good one in terms of this trap was really about like breaking free of your past, or essentially killing this past that you've had in order to move forward. There's the person that Amanda kills in order to get the key out. That in the original version of the script, this was actually her drug dealer, and that was something that I wish they had kept in the final version of this film, because that hammers home the point of the trap even more. That Amanda is quite literally killing the drug addiction part of her past by killing the dealer. So yeah, this is definitely one of the better traps in the franchise. And Going back to the not so great traps, up next we have the drill chair. This was one that it's really unclear what exactly is going on. I mean, not the trap itself, but so we have a person, this random person named Jeff, who is strapped in a chair with drill bits on the sides of their head that keep moving closer to them. Don't really get it. We have no idea why this person is here, what sort of lesson is supposed to be learned. I don't even know if we find out specifically whether this was a trap that was supposed to be for the situation that happened, which was almost a distraction for the detectives, or whether it was for some other plan that John Kramer had that just got interrupted by Detective Tappan But yeah, it serves more just as something to take up time or slow the detectives down. There's no lesson that I could figure out that you actually learn from this trap. No real sense of, okay, once I've beaten this trap, I'm grateful to be alive. It's just there. The wiki lists the quadruple shotgun hallway trap next, which is the one that takes out Detective Singh. I don't consider this like a real saw trap so much as maybe a booby trap or a small defense thing. And going back to the drill chair, this is something again that there's no lesson learned from it whatsoever. There's no way to actually get out of it alive rather than just not running into it in the first place. It's just something that is there. It kills Detective Singh in a very graphic manner, but that's it. There's nothing else to it. It's straightforward. It's not even a trap in my opinion. And the other thing that this lists is Zepp Hindel's test. This was one that it's not a trap, it's more of a test. And I'm a little bit unclear about this one. So the main thing is that Zepp has to keep watch over the bathroom trap, which that in itself is something that shows up in later movies. You're going to have cases of people involved in traps just on the outside of it. Either they're just involved in it but not really part of it, like what happened with the drill chair, or they're just watching. But we don't really know like what bad things Zepp has done. Why is he being placed in this situation other than the fact that we saw him in some flashbacks? I don't think there's really a lesson that gets learned from it. It's there. It's part of the plot, and again, it's more just a straightforward test rather than a trap. Anyway, side issue there. What else do I want to talk about with this movie? So the movie itself has a very grimy look. Part of that is just what they were going for, which is really nice. It helps make the movie feel very gritty. And other parts of it is just the budget they were working with, especially compared to later movies in the series. I think the budget kept getting bigger with each subsequent film as they kept being more popular. But this was made for, I think I looked it up and it was $1.2 million. I could be wrong about that. But yeah, so they really had to make that money count. They had to take shortcuts or do certain things in order to just stretch the budget as much as they could. And that was, I believe, one of the reasons why you had just this really frantic editing. And you had, they didn't have enough time to be able to do a lot of takes. So very, it has like kind of like an indie movie feel to it in that it's just with bigger budget movies, there's a certain kind of quality that you expect from them, and this movie doesn't have that at all. You don't expect it, and I think just the griminess of it really works. I think the only other thing I want to mention is the theme, "Hello Zep." This is, or just as a small note on the soundtrack, it's misspelled. Zep's name actually has one P, but the yeah, "Hello Zep" and "Zep Overture" are listed with two P's. I don't know why. Maybe someone out there can tell me. But this is definitely, it's a really iconic theme. To me, it is one of the more recognizable horror themes, possibly the at least in my mind, the most iconic one since the original Halloween in 1978. I don't know if that's a controversial opinion. I don't know. I really like this theme. It's it's a nice track, and just the fact that this is something that shows up again and again in, I want to say, every movie in the franchise. And when you first hear those first couple notes, of the theme coming in, you know it's about to get real. You're about to have your mind blown, or at least people are going to attempt to blow your mind. And yeah, this is where the movie hits its apex. This is where everything just comes to a front, everything comes together, and the music serves that really well. It's just a great track. Brilliant job by Charlie Clouser. And yeah, I think that's all I have for this movie. And yeah, I will be back.